Welcome back to We Want Picks. I'm Awesome MMA and I'm going to be talking about Contender Series 2023 week number 2. I'm coming off a pretty rough week number 1 and it really was a harsh reminder that really anything can happen in Dana White's Contender Series. A plus 250 underdog one and a plus 300 underdog one. It is pretty hard to pick those, and man, it was very interesting to see that Dana White gave out 5 contracts. I do believe that we're going to see a lot of contracts given out this year, and I think week number 2 could be one of those weeks because I'm expecting a lot of really good fights on this week, and week number 3 as well. I think week 2 and 3 are probably some of the stronger weeks as for fight entertainment value that we're going to get into, and I will talk about that as I give my predictions for the card upcoming. But week 1, it was just a brutal reminder that anything happens in Dana White's Contender Series, and it is quite hard to predict. But obviously I have gone and done a lot of research to break down these fights. Hopefully you guys do enjoy that. But before we do get into the picks though, you do have the We Want Picks premium membership service. UFC 292 is coming up right around the corner, and you can get a 3-day free trial to the premium service if you sign up using the code ARTEM. You get a free trial for 3 days. You can cancel at any time. And now with all that being said, let's get into the predictions. So kicking off the card for Dana White's Contender Series, it's going to be Cameron Smotherman taking on Charalampous Grigoriou at 135 pounds. And it should be a pretty good fight between two bantamweights that do mostly strike against each other. Charalampous Grigoriou, though, is a guy that can offensively wrestle, and he probably will offensively wrestle in this matchup as well. He represents Cyprus. He will be fighting to be one of the first fighters from Cyprus after Kostas Filopou did about 10 years ago. And Cameron Smotherman, he does remind me a lot of Nate Diaz in a lot of good ways. He kind of has an accent that sounds like him, and the way that he kind of acts is just very likable, very fan friendly. If you watch his interviews after his fights especially, you will understand what I mean. I think he could have a very good post-fight interview if he is to get a win in this matchup here. But the thing is about Cameron Smotherman is he's a great striker, but he does leave himself to be hit quite a bit, and he does love to exchange in the pocket. Now, that's not a bad thing at all, because when he does take on his opponents, especially recently, he is the better fighter when it comes to having eyes in the pocket. He throws a lot of counter shots, he throws a lot of hooks, he lands a lot of good shots when he is getting hit, so he does take one to give one at time, and his striking defense is pretty good, but he does love to exchange in the pocket, whereas Charalampous Grigoriou is a very fast striker. He is quite aggressive, but he can be put on the back foot quite easily, and he doesn't look very good when he is put on the back foot, whereas Cameron Smotherman is a guy that is always pressuring forward and always moving forward, and I think that pressure could put a lot of pressure on Charalampous Grigoriou, and maybe his striking won't look so good if he is on the back foot. But the thing about Grigoriou that he does have is very solid offensive wrestling. He didn't really use his offensive wrestling all too much, but it is absolutely something he probably could dig into in this fight, because Cameron Smotherman can get taken down and he can get controlled, because he isn't the biggest guy at 135 pounds. But with that being said, Grigoriou isn't the biggest guy at 135 either. Grigoriou has fought a pretty mixed level of competition. He did take on this guy, Joey Cristomo Jr., who was 2-5, but he took the fight on short notice, and Joey Cristomo actually really impressed me. Like, Cristomo didn't give Charalampous an easy fight. He really tried to win, was super aggressive in the first round, but he did end up getting finished by Grigoriou. It is a pretty fun fight, if you can believe it. Whereas Cameron Smotherman, I would say, has been fighting a little bit higher level competition. You know, Peter Caraballero was on a win streak. He took the Fury FC belt in that one there. He beat Adam Martinez as well, and a couple of other decent opponents. But the thing with Cameron Smotherman, he does have a lot of power on the feet. So does Charalampous, but I do believe that Cameron Smotherman's going to be pressuring forward. I think he's going to be throwing volume, and I do think he does find a knockout over Charalampous in this matchup here. If you do look at the odds, Cameron Smotherman is minus 225, Charalampous Grigoriou is plus 185. I'm going with the favorite. I am picking Cameron Smotherman. I do believe that pressure that he does bring forward is going to be a little bit too much for Charalampous Grigoriou, who doesn't look that good when he's on the back foot. So I'm going to go with Cameron Smotherman, the guy that does love to move forward, the guy that loves to pressure forward, the guy that throws a lot of volume, has good eyes in the pocket. He isn't the most defensively sound, but I think he should be able to finish off Charalampous Grigoriou by knockout. I'm going to go with Cameron Smotherman. He's got a very likable personality as well, but obviously that's not why I'm picking him. I do believe that he can put Charalampous on the back foot, where Charalampous just isn't as effective of a striker when he's walking forward. So give me Cameron Smotherman to win by KO, maybe within the first 2 rounds of the fight. And moving up the card, you got Paulo Renato Jr. taking on Aslan at 205 pounds. And if you do look into this fight, it leaves so many more questions than answers. Paulo Renato Jr. did fight on Dana White's Contender Series last year, took on Jamal Pogue, who took him on short notice. In that matchup, Paulo Renato Jr. threw a lot of volume. He just didn't land a lot, and Jamal Pogue ended up winning a decision. But after that, he's fought a couple of guys that weren't the best fighters in the world. And to make it even more interesting, the promotion that he fights for inside Fighters League, every card that they do seem to be fighters like Paulo Renato Jr. with good records, with good talent, taking on guys that either don't have much experience whatsoever, or guys with losing records. And it's just very interesting that that happened, because the same thing can be said against Aslan, because if you look at Aslan, you can find these fights relatively easily. Aslan versus Amil and his fight against Giorgio Kabashvili. Both of these guys, yes, they do have losing records, but they just look like they didn't necessarily want to win. Because if you, in the case of Giorgio Kabashvili, he didn't throw any shots whatsoever. He just accepted leg kicks and then got finished off by leg kicks in that fight. And then against Amil, who was actually a UFC veteran and fought for the UFC a long time ago. He's very old now, but in that matchup, Amil didn't throw anything whatsoever, just kind of accepted punishment, accepted leg kicks, went for a takedown, didn't get the takedown, fell over, and accepted ground and pound to get finished. There is a lot of questions to be had against Aslan, so that's kind of what I'm working with Paulo Renato Jr. and Aslan. Two guys that are looking good, taking on guys that are potentially in there to lose against them. Whereas Aslan, the best tape you can actually watch on him is his loss to Anton Turkalj, because in that matchup, you can actually tell that he does have a lot of skills. He goes out there, he doesn't look that great though, because he's not a technical fighter whatsoever, as you can kind of imagine from a guy with all of his wins by knockout, most of them in the first round and most of them early in the first round. He does go out there and just tries to finish you, man. This guy throws a lot of heat in his shots. He's going out there and he's super aggressive. He throws a lot of volume, he throws a lot of power. He can get takedowns as well. I have seen him go for a takedown before, but his grappling and his gas tank are his two biggest weaknesses. I think two things he probably won't have to worry about too much against Paulo Renato Jr., well, especially the grappling, because Paulo Renato Jr., to my knowledge, is a former Brazilian kickboxing national champion, and he doesn't grapple at all. He also tries to do the same thing. He also goes out to try and knock you out. But in the matchup against Anton Turkalj, Aslan has a lot of success on the feet. He lands a lot of very good shots on Turkalj. Turkalj gets him down, eventually submits a completely gassed out Aslan, who is gassed out, but he's still trying to win. He's still going out there. Whereas Paulo Renato Jr. as well, he's also a striker, potentially more technical than Aslan with that kickboxing background. But one thing I can tell you that is a fact, that Aslan is going to go out there and try and take out Paulo Renato Jr. in the first round, and Paulo Renato Jr. is probably going to try and do the same thing. I think that this fight is going to be fantastic if it ends in the first two rounds. If the fight doesn't even end in the first round, potentially, both of these guys could gas out trying to take each other out, and it could be quite boring. I am going with Aslan to win this matchup, but I do want to kind of emphasize that there's not a lot to go off in this matchup, because yes, you can find tape on Aslan, yes, you can find tape on Paulo Renato Jr., but it's against competition that's not really that good. It's against guys that aren't really testing them. I'm going with Aslan. He is the favorite in the matchup. He is minus 165. Paulo Renato Jr. is plus 135. I think Aslan is going to go out there and try and get a KO in the first round, and I do think he is going to get that KO in the first round, but if he doesn't get the KO in the first round, he might not look as good. So give me Aslan to win by first round KO. Not a confident pick, but I'm going to go with him because I just know that he's going to try and find that round 1 KO. I'm kind of banking on him getting it. So definitely a fight I wouldn't bet. Maybe if fight doesn't go the distance, is anything reasonable, which it probably won't be. Could be a play, but probably just a fight to avoid. Both of these guys, there is tape on them, but it's just not really tape that's going to tell you a lot about their fighting skill and style. But give me Aslan. I do think he is going to get the win in this matchup. Moving on up the card, you've got Hyder Amil taking on Emrah Sonmez, and I'm just going to come out and say I am picking the big underdog in this one here. Emrah Sonmez is plus 170 and Hyder Amil is minus 210, but the reason why I am going to go with the underdog in this matchup is for both of these guys, this is their nightmare matchup. Hyder Amil is a very good striker. He's a little bit of a brawler on the feet, but he's got a lot of power, but his weakness is bad takedown defense and bad cardio, whereas for Emrah Sonmez's weakness is his striking, but he's very good at wrestling, but he also has pretty bad cardio. So it's going to be a matchup between who can really get their game going. And for Hyder Amil, if Hyder Amil wins, it will be because the fighter's on the feet, he's kept the fight on the feet, and he's lighting up Emrah Sonmez on the feet because he is the better striker in the matchup. Whereas for Emrah Sonmez, if he wins, it's going to be because he can get the takedowns. And I did watch a lot of tape on Hyder Amil. Now, there is quite a bit on there on UFC Fight Pass, and he did fight for Bellator, but it is worth noting that the guy that fought for Bellator is not the same fighter today. He looks better every single fight. He's constantly making improvements. But the thing is with Hyder Amil, one thing that has been pretty common in his fights is he does get taken down. And a fight that I will say did get taken down is against Chase Gibson. Now, he spent the first minute of the fight just beating the crap out of Chase Gibson, to put it bluntly, and then Chase Gibson took him down, controlled his back for the entirety of the first round. Round 2 comes along and he knocks out Chase Gibson pretty much within the first 20 seconds of round 2. But that fight there, Chase Gibson was able to get Hyder Amil down. If you do watch his other fight, a lot of other fighters, like especially Devontae Sewell, I thought that Hyder Amil won that fight, but Devontae Sewell was able to have a lot of success with his wrestling. Once again, Hyder Amil was able to have a lot of success with his striking. And for Emrah Sonmez, I do say he's got a questionable gas tank, because if you watch him fight Liam Gittins for Cage Warriors, once again this fight is on UFC Fight Pass, he gasses out. He looks really good early on, and then he just completely gasses out, and Liam Gittins is able to take over and submits him. He goes on a bit of a win streak against decent opponents, to be fair, but not in Cage Warriors, not for other promotions. Comes back to Cage Warriors, take on Adam Moschini, and his cardio looks much, much, much better. I think either it's one or two things. I think he's improved his cardio, which is very, very likely. I mean, it was 2 years ago. And the second thing is his cardio holds up much better when he's the one going forward and getting the takedowns. I think it's a combination of two things. I'm going to go with Emrah Sonmez because I believe that he can get the fight to the ground. I do believe that he can take down Hyder Amil, and I do believe he can control Hyder Amil. The problem with Emrah Sonmez when it does come to getting a UFC contract is his style isn't that exciting. He does have a very heavy, constant wrestling style, chain wrestling a lot. He does have a beard with no mustache, if that kind of gives you a little bit of an indication of what he does try to do. He tries to take you down, and he tries to control and land ground and pound. He does have a lot of finishes, but a lot of those finishes aren't over the best levels of competition. I think he can go out there and beat Hyder Amil. I think he can go out there and take down Hyder Amil, control Hyder Amil, make Hyder Amil work, because Hyder Amil, as I said, he doesn't have the best cardio in the world, and if you're taking Hyder down, and then he's got to stand up, and you take him down again, and then he's got to stand up. I think that Emrah Sonmez just constantly taking down Hyder, forcing him to work, forcing him to stand up. It's going to tire out Hyder Amil. So I'm going to go with Emrah Sonmez to win by decision. But I think if he finds a finish, it will probably be by late TKO. And for Hyder Amil, I think if he wins, it's probably going to be by very early knockout. So I'm going to go with Emrah Sonmez by decision or late finish. I'm just going to believe that he can get the takedowns early and get the takedowns often. It is one of those fights, though, as I said at the start of me breaking down this fight, it is a nightmare matchup for both guys. It's a nightmare matchup for Emrah Sonmez. It's a nightmare matchup for Hyder Amil, but I do believe that Emrah Sonmez gets it done with the wrestling. Only 14% of people picking him on Tapology. I am one of those 14%. I do believe that Emrah Sonmez can get it done in this matchup with his constant wrestling. And now we move on up the card to Eduarda Moura taking on Janaina Silva. And this is another fight with a lot of question marks on it, especially because of Eduarda Moura. There is not a lot of tape out there of Eduarda Moura at all. You can't really find anything. I did manage to find on Reddit, someone posted her fight against Eduarda Santana, which was very useful because in that matchup I was able to see kind of what her game is all about, but it seems like I wasn't the only one to struggle finding tape on Eduarda Moura, because I did have someone message me. I did find out from other people as well that were making predictions for this card that they were struggling to find tape, so it just seems like there's nothing on Eduarda Moura out there except for this one fight that someone posted on Reddit. So thankfully to that, we kind of know what she's all about. Her nickname is Ronda, and it kind of does explain what she does, because she is a grappler. She can wrestle, she can grapple, and that is how she tries to win her fights. On paper, she's got a lot of submissions, which would kind of make you think that she's a grappler, but if you do watch her fight against Eduarda Santana, it is on Reddit somewhere. Not really the first place I would look for a fight, but I found it on there. So she takes on Eduarda Santana, she takes her down, she controls her for a lot. The fight isn't that exciting, but she does end up getting a rear naked choke, and it does kind of tell me what she's going to try and do. As for Janaina Silva, though, there's a lot more tape out there for Janaina Silva. You can find almost every single one of her fights, which is very useful. And one thing I can tell you about Janaina Silva, She's going to be fun to watch, especially if she does win this fight and make it into the UFC. She reminds me a lot of Denise Gomes, very aggressive on the feet, pretty heavy with the boxing, and she is quite powerful as well. Similar striking style, just very aggressive on the feet. She does throw kicks as well, but she is very, very aggressive, very powerful shot. She does have KOs on her record as well, and she's a decent striker. As for Eduarda Moura's striking, I can't really tell you anything because there wasn't a lot of striking in that matchup that there is on Reddit, but I'm just going to pick Eduarda Moura because I think that she can take down Janaina Silva, and I do think she will be the better grappler there. I have seen Janaina Silva struggle in the clinch before. I've seen her taken down as well. I know that's what Eduarda Moura is going to try and do. This is also a really bad kind of reason to pick her, but I do believe Eduarda Moura is going to be much, much bigger in the matchup as well, because Janaina Silva is quite small. She is 5'1" with a 64-inch reach, whereas Eduarda Moura does have a 67-inch reach, and she is 5'6". I think she can be bigger than Janaina Silva. I think she will be able to outmuscle Silva and take her down, and then work for a submission or maybe a decision. I'm going to go with Eduarda Moura by submission in this matchup. She is the favorite. I was very interested to see what the odds makers were going to do with this fight because, as I said, there's no tape out there whatsoever. But they have made Eduarda Moura the favorite. I do think it is a little bit suitable that they've done that. But once again, probably a fight I wouldn't bet on because, as I said, there's no tape out there on Moura. It's very hard to actually get a solid read on what she's about. Whereas for Janaina Silva, she seems to be a very, very aggressive and fun striker. But I can see Eduarda Moura clinching her up against the cage, getting a takedown, and then controlling and grappling from there. So give me Eduarda Moura to win this fight by submission. Maybe a decision as well. It's just one of those fights. There's not a lot of... unfortunately, there's just not a lot of evidence out there because Eduarda Moura has no tape on the internet that I could really find. So let me know what you think about this one in the comments below, but I am going to go with Eduarda Moura to win this matchup with her wrestling and her grappling. And now we move on to the main event of week number 2 of Dana White's Contender Series 2023. It's going to be Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady taking on George Hardwick. And this is going to be a fight that's going to get a lot of attention from media and fans alike, and is because many people believe that George Hardwick doesn't have to go on Contender Series. They believe that he's done enough to be signed outright to the UFC. And I do agree as well. You know, he has a multiple-time Cage Warriors defending champion, fought some very, very good opponents in Cage Warriors. He looks better and better every single time he fights. But I do also believe that the UFC is trying to use Contender Series to promote George Hardwick. And I do believe that's a pretty good idea, because I think that George Hardwick, if he does win this fight, which I do think he does, just to kind of give my pick out there right now, I do think George Hardwick wins this fight. And I think the UFC can use Dana White's Contender Series as a way to promote George Hardwick. I feel like an extreme case of Contender Series really helping a prospect. I do understand Bo Nickel already was a pretty big name going into the Contender Series, but the Contender Series completely elevated that, got him very, very hyped up, and maybe even a more direct comparison. I would say the Bomb Firm brothers were able to get much more promotion off Dana White's Contender Series than they would have if they were to sign it outright. That is just my opinion, though. I do think that's why they've made him go on the Contender Series, not because they don't think that he's deserving of a straight-up shot to the UFC, but because they believe that they can use Contender Series to promote George Hardwick into a pretty big name right off the bat, and I think it's a good idea. I do understand, and I do also kind of agree as well, because I think that George Hardwick is a fantastic prospect, and I do believe that he beats Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady. Now, it is a bad stylistic matchup for Hardwick. If you're not familiar with George Hardwick is a very, very good striker. I would say for the most part a very good boxer as well, to kind of make it a bit more confined. But when it comes to his boxing, he's very slick. He looks very good. He improves every single time. And another thing about George Hardwick as well is he does have very good takedown defense, which is going to matter in this matchup, because Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady is a wrestler, and he has gone on a pretty good run recently, but it's not against very good opponents. But if you do look into his career, and you do look back quite a while, this guy has fought some very, very good competition. He took on Charlie Leary, who I believe has now gone on to fight for Bellator, not having the most success in the world, but still a good win. Eric Da Silva was 21-4 at the time. Lucas Martins was 20-3 at the time. He did win by injury, but he still beat a 20-3 opponent. But then he got KO'd twice in the very first round for Brave. went over to the USA to train, and now he's been fighting guys that just aren't the best fighters in the world. Nick Copton is a pretty good fighter, though. I will vouch for that win there. But aside from that, he's not really beating the best guys in the world. He is a wrestler. He does like to wrestle. He does have good ground and pound as well, as you can see by 2 first-round ground and pound wins. And that's how he is going to try and beat George Hardwick. He needs to go out there and try and wrestle George Hardwick. On the feet, Hardwick's going to be the better striker. He is a very good striker. He is going to be able to outstrike Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady. I do believe he's going to be able to find the chin or even the body, because George Hardwick does have finishes 2 body shots against Chris Bungard and also Kyle Driscoll as well. Very good liver shots, very good body shots. And I think he probably could go out there and land one of those against Kareem Al-Selwady as well. But I am going to go with George Hardwick to win by KO in the first 2 rounds. As I said, every time George Hardwick fights, he impresses me even more and more and more. The George Hardwick that fought Chris Bungard is not as good as the Yanli S. George Hardwick. This guy is making rapid improvements. He's getting better and better and better. I have a feeling maybe his brother could fight in the UFC as well. He's got a brother called Harry Hardwick. I was hoping that Harry Hardwick would be on the Contender Series as well. Let's see if that still can happen, but I'm going to go with George Hardwick. He's a massive favorite in this matchup. He's minus 350. Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady is plus 275. One thing I am going to say, though, is if it is true that UFC is trying to use Contender Series to promote Hardwick, they are running a risk with this matchup, because it is actually stylistically a pretty tough matchup for George Hardwick. Yes, we have seen Kareem Al-Selwady KO'd 3 times in the first round in his losses, but he is a good wrestler, and maybe he could take down Hardwick. But I do believe that the difference on the feet is going to be nice and day, and I do think that Hardwick goes out there and knocks out Abdul-Kareem Al-Selwady in the first 2 rounds. So give me Hardwick to win this matchup. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm very much looking forward to Contender Series 2023 week number 2. But one thing I am going to tell you that will be true is week number 3 is going to be awesome. Week 2 is great, but week 3 is going to be insane. I cannot wait for week number 2, and I cannot wait for week number 3. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Are you excited for Contender Series this year? Did you enjoy week number 1? And with all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next one.